I do want to sort of set expectations. I'm going back to the day job, but this talk is some things and it isn't others. So obviously it's going to cover some of the decisions made by Netlify, but I'm not going to go into the depth of all of these decisions or the rationale because that's confidential information. What I do want to leave you all with are some things that you can think about and that would apply to any situation, because I think that's most helpful, rather than anything specific to my teams, my company, or anything like that. I'd also, because I'm still an engineer at heart, I would say that everything depends and there is never a one-size-fits-all. So there's not going to be a recipe that anybody can take and then apply to any other company. I think that the only thing that is a recipe for disaster, in all honesty. And I've seen that play out too, not necessarily with open source, but yeah. So as a summary of what I'm going to cover today, I've called it the 3 S's because I couldn't come up with a better title for the slide, in all honesty, but the actual parts of it are key. Why do we care about open source sustainability? I imagine most folks at this conference care enormously, otherwise they wouldn't be here. So I'm going to cover a little bit on that from maybe a business perspective, so maybe it's something that you can take back to stakeholders. For the strategy, this is kind of the important things, the things that I've learned from experience or have been inspired by my peers or my bosses around, where we need to make sure that we're doing important things and we're thinking about them. And then also kind of what are some measures of success? Again, something else that execs tend to ask you about a lot. And also, again, what is success in the open source? I think that's very individual to a project and a person and everything else. But there are going to be certain things that matter to you as a business or a project or a team. So, why sustainability? Indeed. This is your kind of standard maintainer. I'm friends and acquaintances with many open source maintainers, and they definitely go through periods of this is lovely, I love my community, I love my project, and then there's a lot of downsides too. Let's be honest about this. There's a lot of entitlement from users of open source, which is astounding, given that they don't want to contribute, they don't want to care about its upkeep, they don't want to even add to the docs when there's something that is a typo. There's also a kind of level of demand from some people which goes counter to the ethos of open source. It's out there, it's open, everybody can contribute, we want to make it so everybody can contribute. But some people kind of see it as, well, you put it out there, it's a thing I'm using, and they treat it like a commercial product but without any of the commercials. So one of the reasons we want to make things sustainable is that we don't want maintainers to burn out, because that's just going to leave a lot of dead projects out there. Now again, I'm not saying don't ever shut down a project if it's run its course or there is nobody that cares enough to actively maintain it anymore. That's normal and natural, but preferably do it in a way that's in your control. It's also interesting to note that approximately 90% of the software supply chain has got some open source in it. That was from a software supply chain report of about 3 years ago now, so it could even have changed and gotten higher, honestly. So there's a lot riding on this commercially, possibly even military and NASA and all sorts of things like that. So again, we do need to care about these things. And it's not always easy. There are things like Log4j, the Heartbleed, even the left pad, which just basically annoyed people because it's really easy to write that, but it just broke a bunch of stuff temporarily. There's sort of an expectation like, oh no, it's broken. All the security researchers, all these companies like, oh no, we need to fix this thing. And you've got 2 folks that do this stuff when they're not doing their day job and they're not with their families and not hanging out with their friends, expecting to support a global set of software. And I don't think that's realistic, and that's not something that Netlify sees as realistic either. So another kind of key thing leading on from that Netlify point, and actually tying in with our Jamstack Innovation Fund, which is not something I'm pitching here because it's not open source, it's actually for companies. Just to be clear, this is not a sales pitch. But there is a massive ecosystem in open source. There's also an ecosystem that Netlify both relies upon and enables with the platform that we have. And we believe it's important to publicly support things that we did not build, that we do not own, that we cannot control the roadmap of, because by doing things like that, it supports everybody to some extent. Never going to please all of the people all of the time. I get that, but we can definitely make some good steps there. And being a true part of the community too. It's fine to say that you're in the community, but if you never let your devs work on a thing, or you're against pushing upstream fixes from within your own, if you fork it and then start diverging it instead of pushing those upstream fixes, those sorts of things will definitely get you started, and maybe in a sort of seed company or in a crunch time you might need to do something like that to get something shipped, but then fix that, contribute back, level up other people, because you get a reputation from that, hopefully a good one, by being part of the community. And again, if you put things out in public and claim that they're open source, make sure they're open source. Make sure you will accept contributions from anybody, anywhere, at any company. Because, and again, I'm not talking about sort of open cause and people building businesses around them. I'm very okay with people building businesses around these things. It's more the fake open source that I've seen a few companies do, where they're like, yeah, this is all being done in the open, we take anything from anywhere, all ideas are valid, and then they just close a bunch of PRs with no good rationale. And again, I'm not saying maintainers have to take every PR that's given, but it's useful to say this is not something that we're focusing on at this time, and explain why, to give that feedback or whatever. It gets sticky where companies are actually kind of doing proprietary work and trying to half do it in the open, and there's kind of a problem of their own making, in all honesty. So that's something that we try very hard not to do, and to be open about anything that we do. But I have multiple teams in my organization who are pushing stuff upstream constantly into various frameworks, which is web development frameworks, a big part of what happens on Netlify. And we like them all, as long as they like us back. I just want to kind of say as well, like, this is not a zero sum. There is not a one winner. There's not a, we can all build good stuff. We can all make progress. There's a lot of both intellectual and financial upside for depending on the project and the team and the company for these things. And I had to laugh when I saw this comic when I was trying to find something to demonstrate this, because I've definitely seen this kind of behavior, both from companies and in open source. So, onto the strategic considerations, and this is where I think I can probably bring most to this presentation, and hopefully give you some real good nuggets to walk away with. You have to make hard decisions. You have to make hard decisions in life, unfortunately. You have to make them in business. You have to make them even in open source projects, all honestly. You can't do all things for all people at all times. You need to understand what is important to your business. So there are things relating to Jamstack and web frameworks and certain integrations that Netlify cares very much about. That does not mean we're going to go fund a bunch of Docker-related open source tooling, because that's not a core competency for us. It's not where we have expertise. It's not where we can help level up other folks. This can be disappointing to people when they're looking for support, be that advice or finance or whatever. But again, it's about being honest with them as well. It's about saying, hey, you're doing a great thing, really interested in it if you are. Don't make that up if you're not. But this is not something that is key to us at the moment, and we would be doing you a disservice by trying to bring you in. Also, things may change over time. So, what is not right now, or what is right now, may not be the thing that you care about in a year's time. Technology might have moved on. A project may have bloomed and blossomed and gotten a bunch of features that you actually need. Alternatively, as I said, deprecating and closing down a project that has run its course is maybe something that you need to consider doing. Don't be afraid of making decisions. Very few decisions are irreversible. Again, not talking about life and medical and things there at that level, but in tech, we can archive a repo on GitHub, and then we can unarchive it. Things are not going to be the end of the world with many of these decisions. And I think one of the key things you may need to kind of bring to a discussion here is, particularly when you've got a bunch of really passionate devs who are sort of maybe saying, oh, there's this thing I love, or this tooling, or this thing, and I really think we should support it, and it's doing great stuff. You need to actually ask them what value does it bring to the business, not to them a personal tool chain, not to their intellectual curiosity. I definitely go dabble in random projects just because I'm interested, but that doesn't mean I should have my teams work on them or Netlify to fund them. So be careful not to let personal passions or intellectual curiosity get in the way here. This has to be a pragmatic thing. Again, some folks may find that hard to take. Some very passionate devs I know don't really align with that, but we have to be realistic. There's no good we fund everything and then go out of business ourselves, because then nobody gets anything. So, yeah. Very much related to all of these decisions is the intentionality of everything that you do. So it's be clear with expectations and guidelines to everybody involved, including the open source project, if you're more than just an active contributor like anybody else. You need to be clear with employees as to yes, we're fine with you working on this, but there needs to be a reason for you to be working on this, not just you don't fancy doing the other work that's out there that the company needs you to do. I've definitely seen that one, not at Netlify, but in previous jobs I've seen that one play out badly, where there was definitely, rather than a sort of 20% on the open source, 80% on the company, the other way around, and that's tough. I think the other really important thing that it's good to be intentional about and to be open and honest about is that by being part of a community and funding, or be that financially or with time or advice or expertise, a project, if you're kind of buying it, whatever that means in open source land, say so. Say this is being run by us and we will make decisions that are aligned with our business rather than necessarily the community. But if that isn't the case, and it's not for the frameworks that we contribute to at Netlify, we don't have any say in their roadmaps. We just give back the things that make it work better on our platform. Yeah, it actually kind of ties to what Scott Hansen was saying in the keynote, like, oh, I got 30 years of experience. Like, you don't roll in and go, hey, I'm the thing, I demand that you do this. That is not being part of the community. That is not, it's not part of the open source ethos. Now, I will say that certain folks in different parts of the businesses, in sales or operations or whatever, that's really hard to explain to them in language that they can really connect with and understand. But they're like, but we're doing this, we should get that back. It's very much a trading thing to them. But you can do it. And again, this is where you need to be intentional in setting expectations internally and externally. I think it's also important that if you own the project as a company, if it's something that you're contributing back and you're giving to the community, again, say that. If it is going to be a core part of your business strategy and you are going to make decisions behind closed doors, I question whether the whole project should be open source at that point, or that maybe you need to split parts of it out. Or even, are you just doing this to say that you have an open source project, but you don't really want to live that? I think that's disingenuous. If everything is opaque, you're not building trust with people using that project. And that is massive, honestly, because you need champions. You need folks that are willing to put time and effort into it. And why would they do that for no recompense if they don't believe in it? So they need to have something that they think it's giving or supporting their business, for example. But yeah, there's always going to be a reason for them to want to be involved, and you should work with that. I think it's also important as well to reflect and do a review periodically. Are these things still serving our needs? Has this project that we depend on ceased to be maintained? Do we need to step in? Do we want to steward it? Or do we just want to fork and bring in a thing in-house that we will then kind of keep private? Again, I understand the open source and free software folks would be upset with that last one, but I'm being pragmatic here. This is about how businesses need to operate. There's definitely cases where technology has changed. It's not even that the intent of the project is no longer viable, but how it's been implemented or what it's been written in or how it integrates is now not a good way of doing stuff. The way cloud computing and everything else has changed over time. Those are kind of good reasons to sort of say, actually, no, we need to step back from this. It'll be cheaper to do a redo. Also, I would say it's important to remember the business strategy changes. I mean, the economic climate now is not one that people were necessarily expecting. Like, everybody saw the markets dive when the pandemic first hit, and then they recovered. We're now going through a period of turmoil, and there's a lot of change in all industries, not just tech. But I suspect there's going to be a lot of reprioritization and a lot of refocusing on things from various companies. And again, it's okay to say, hey, we can no longer support this because we're not going to do a good job of it. If anybody else wants to take it, please do so. Or you can use this alternative solution. Those sorts of things are okay to kind of cover. Where I think it's important is to be transparent and be honest with folks and share the reasoning. Don't just archive the GitHub repo and run. I mean, you can, but, update the README, update the website, keep that website around for a bit longer. Again, whatever is appropriate for a given project. Yeah. Okay, so the question for those that may not have heard it is that there's always a cost involved in contributing to or starting an open source project. How would you convince management that this is a good thing to do? I would say you treat it like any other project. If one of my engineers or one of my teams comes to me with something and I can see that it aligns with our strategy or our OKRs, this isn't talking internally here, then we have a conversation about it and see where can we make that fit, for example. I would say the same would be true with an open source one. It's like, I want to do this thing, this will benefit the company in this way, but I want to take it open because I want us to, and then list some reasons. Those reasons are going to be unique to your project, your team, and your company. But it's about showing that you've thought things through, that you've thought of how we're going to maintain this. Because that's another one. It's all very well sharing a thing. Like, there are many, many repos out there of one and done. People did a thing, shared it out there. Maybe people are using it, maybe they're not, but it's not received any commits or anything for like 5-10 years. So think about the things you would think about for code you were writing inside of the company and apply that thinking, because then your management or your execs, depending on what level you have to go to, are able to sort of say, hey, this would be valuable here, or we could talk about our open source there, or again, it's going to be company dependent. And I would say it's probably an easier win in a tech company than a company that relies on tech as a cost center, in all honesty. Are you talking about per PR or actually open sourcing huge projects here? Well, to me, I don't think there is a cost to a PR. If we need to fix a thing in an open source project and we happen to use it internally, we just do the PR. I don't see what scrutiny that needs to go through other than the normal review processes. Yes, and this comes back to probably a completely different talk, and that's about how do you run an open source project. Again, I think those points are going to be unique. You need to make a business case, and I don't know what your business is. I don't know what your management cares about, but those are the things that you would need to address. I don't think there is, as I said at the start of the talk, there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all here. You need to apply company and business considerations, also company cultural considerations. There's a lot of things that tie into what is right for a business or not. Okay, so this is kind of related to that question in terms of various kind of measures of success. What I think we can do if we publicly support a project as a company is it gives some predictability. It allows people to know that at that point in time, and again, it's not going to be forever, which is something I think devs sometimes forget about, this project is going to be money for hosting or so many hours per month donated. Again, there are so many ways you can contribute to open source. There are plenty of talks that is not this one that will cover that kind of stuff. That predictability, I think, gives some level of stability and confidence to the maintainers, because there's somebody they can turn to. I mean, if you're being an advisor even, I think there is a role for being an advisors in open source projects to help those that are newer to the game. Kind of, as I say, running an open source project is a whole thing in itself, and I am not the best person. I can refer you to a few folks that could talk about that, but yeah, that you have to. It's a massive undertaking. I think it also gives predictability for the business. This is more in the case where you're depending on an open source project. You know that if something major comes in that's going to affect your business, you are likely to get that contribution accepted. You're not going to have to do the forking. You can give back. In the case of some of the vulnerabilities that we found in open source projects in the more recent history, you will probably already have some familiarity with the code base that you can have people that can jump in there and help not only yourself but everybody else. this again then gives you kind of predictability both for the developers that are kind of, they're already familiar with the code. They can apply that thinking when they're doing architecture and other things around internal code, if it's relying on it. And I'd say the maintainers can definitely sort of, I hope, feel supported. I think that's going to depend on the relationship you have with the various maintainers. I understand that. I will say that the one thing that this doesn't solve, and nothing solves that, is the massive dependency tree complexity of almost any software project right now out there. And that's not just a comment about NPM and NPM modules, but just anything. There's libraries depend on other libraries, depend on other libraries, depend on other libraries now. The supply chain is a real thing in software. I think the other important measure of success that should not be underestimated, but is difficult to explain to the more finance-oriented parts of the business, is around global collaboration and support. We all have seen various studies, again, in the more recent past, where diverse ideas and diverse folks with differing opinions lead to better product outcomes. That's been proven. That also applies to open source. If you are very focused on the UK or the US, two countries which I'm most familiar with, hence picking them, you have a certain way of thinking and certain cultural biases, whether you realise them or not. Having folks contribute that are new to tech, that are in a very different from a different cultural background, all sorts of these things will make your project better. And actually, companies can benefit from this. They can learn from this. They can say, "Oh, we didn't even think about this thing in this other country. We need to be aware of that." But again, the project itself, be that owned by the open source, owned by the company, or just contributed to, you'll pick up a wealth of information. You may also find people you want to hire, from the business perspective. I would say one of the personal benefits I find to working multinationally is that I meet so many people from so many different places and learn so much, and it's just, I love learning. So that constant learning is great. And you end up with unlikely friendships and unlikely collaborations. I would never have said 15 years ago that I have friends in different countries, but people I genuinely call friends are in different countries. And I think that can come out in with various parts of open source. You end up contributing a lot to a given project, or you you end up working with somebody on something, and then you're like, "Oh, I need to do this thing. I'm going to ping this person," and random things come. Serendipity. I think productivity is another key one. When you are depending on something as a business, you need to invest in that in some way, in some form, whatever that might mean. It's not always monetary, but you need to know that you can depend on it. And having folks that can step in, like your engineers on a project that you know they're comfortable with, means that you're not going to suddenly, close to one of your releases, go, "Oh no, it's all broken." And you will have people that can kind of step in there and go from that. And honestly, just general productivity. There is so much amazing software out there, written, some really kind of, why did I not think of that? Like useful utilities, but there's also some really amazingly complex projects out there that you can depend upon. And so you don't have to do the buy versus build discussion necessarily. It's like, is it buy versus build versus find an open source one? And again, that needs to be, there's a big consideration in that. You need to think about what if that project goes away. But you can go a long way now by going and browsing GitHub and plugging things together. So yeah, I think that is a underestimated benefit that, again, less technical leaders of companies may not appreciate. It's like, why would you give all this stuff away for free? Why would you let somebody build on you? Because as they build on you, they come up with better ideas that they will then probably make public if it's already in open source, and you can take those back. you will benefit and level up and learn from them, which is why it's good for you to give back. Thank you. I just want to say as a closing comment, and we have about 15 minutes left for questions, but I would say the important thing for, the one word, genuinely, I would like you to take away from this talk is intentionality.